Ladies and gentlemen, as Team Trump enters its very, very high-octane lap of presidential elections, I'm joined by one of the most well-known Indian Americans who had a bid at the presidential race himself, Vivek Ramaswamy. Entrepreneur, man who's a Republican, a man who has an Indian identity that he's so proud of. Thank you very much, Vivek Ramaswamy, for joining me.
It's great to be here.
You're also an author.
Yes.
And you wear your Indian identity and your Hindu identity on your sleeves. Is that a little bit away from what Americans really find acceptable?
I don't think it's away from what Americans find acceptable. I do think that political advisors find it unadvisable. I've been advised many times that if I wanted to run for U.S. president as a Hindu, and I'm a practicing Hindu, then that would be a challenge. But my view is that you got to present to people who you are. You can't be dishonest about who you are and what you stand for.
We're in the middle of a very high-octane, polarized elections, almost like Indian elections back home, this American elections. And there have been two attempts at assassination of the presidential candidate, Donald Trump. How do you see these elections in terms of the campaign, in terms of the shrill conversations, narrative that's taking place?
So I see a big discrepancy because I've traveled this country extensively, obviously, over the last couple of years. There's a discrepancy between the everyday American versus the portrayals in the media. And I think that this country is actually not nearly as divided as the media would have you believe, or social media, or algorithms. Across the country, I would say 80+% of us share the same basic value set in common. Meritocracy, free speech. That's a big one in America, that you get to speak your mind as long as I get to in return. That's a distinctive and quintessentially American commitment that most Americans share in common. The idea that you may not agree on everything, but you still agree on the basic rules of the road. That's what I see in the country traveling in roomfuls without cameras or social media algorithms. However, the narrative that has been created, and in part it's by the modern internet, in part it's by social media, that preys on division. Advertising dollars are greater when you have somebody click on a story that gives them an emotional anger that's a quicker response. That amplifies, I think, a division that, at least in most of the country, isn't real. But there is a fringe minority, and the sad part is you brought up 2 assassination attempts in a period of 2 months.
So let me ask you, this identity, this idea of trying to be part of something bigger than oneself that you speak about, national pride that you speak about, these are some of the things that form the basis of, Narendra Modi's success as a politician, leading him up to the prime ministerial level over the last 3 elections. Commonality there is coincidental or value system based?
I think it's values based. I admire a number of leaders in other countries, and PM Modi is obviously high on that list, of people who have taken pride in their own country. I think that's a good thing for a citizen of a nation to be grounded. We as human beings, we need to belong to something bigger than ourselves. Individual, family, nation, and God, I think, are more powerful as a message than race, gender, sexuality, and climate. Certainly, I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective, but those principles apply to other countries too. I think people want to know I'm a citizen of this nation. That means something to me. Not a nebulous global citizen vaguely fighting climate change somewhere. But here in the American context, a citizen of the United States of America, that I'm proud of that's grounded in ideals. I've gotten to know other world leaders in the last year as well. Take a leader like Giorgia Meloni in Italy. She's become something of a friend. Somebody who revived Italian national identity. I think in the same way, Modi has been a successful leader in reviving that sense of Indian pride and self-confidence in India. I do think that's an important point. That self-confidence was missing. When I visited India in the 1990s, coming from America, there was a kind of inferiority complex, I'm speaking bluntly, but a psychological sense of inferiority. And I think that a great leader of a nation, not a good leader, but a great leader of a nation, can revive that sense of pride and conviction in oneself, in one's own identity, in one's nation's identity. But I'm looking at this from an American perspective, right? I'm American born, I'm American through and through. I'm proud of my Indian American heritage and my Hindu faith, but I'm American.
Do you think there was Chinese and Russian interference in the elections in the United States? How do you look at, social media, influencing elections itself and the rhetoric that we've heard in recent times? And in that rhetoric, with the attempts at assassination of Donald Trump comes, sentences by Joe Biden, who said, let's get Donald Trump in the bull's eye. Do you think some of these utterances have led to this very polarized narrative on social media?
I think there's something even deeper going on, which is a mental health crisis, both in this country and in the modern West and the modern world more generally. But what these social media algorithms do is they prey on those insecurities, right? They cause you to click on something more quickly than the other thing if it strikes an insecurity or generally a negative emotion in your heart. And so in some ways it's throwing kerosene on a fire, a mental health epidemic that's already burning, really turning that into a conflagration. So I do think that people who are most vulnerable especially are going to do things they otherwise wouldn't have done in an environment of social media really goading them on. I don't think it's made us more happy as Americans, or I think the same is probably true in India if I had to guess, but certainly in America, I don't think it's increased our quality of life. You could say it's increased efficiency, increased effectiveness of reaching mass numbers of people. I have a large social media following myself. I can more easily reach a lot of people, and there's a beautiful side of that. But I think on net, the way these algorithms work have really been preying on our psychological insecurities and frailties, especially in youth.
Let me ask you, Mr. Ramaswamy, are you worried about what will happen in November? There is a one-of-a-kind elections that we're seeing. President Joe Biden was in the running, and then halfway through Kamala Harris comes in, and now polls say what they say about the advantage to Kamala Harris. Are you worried about the Republican campaign being on the defensive?
Look, I think that we're going to be at our best if we offer our own vision of what we stand for. I think it's insufficient to just criticize the other side. You got to do some of that in politics, right? There's room for that. But that's insufficient to win. I think we can't just say this is what the left offers and we're against it. We have to go further, do more than that, and say this is what we actually stand for. This is what it means to be a Republican. This is what it means to be an American.
So we're looking, we're living in times where there are two major wars that are happening across the world. On the one side is Russia, Ukraine. On the other, of course, what's going on in Gaza between the Palestinians and the Israelis. What do you think is the solution to this? There have been attempts made on both sides, especially in the Russia-Ukraine war. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in New York just yesterday, a meeting with Zelensky, his third meeting with him. Do you think there is a breakthrough that can happen, and what's really the route for that?
So look, I believe that this war in Russia and Ukraine needs to come to an end and be resolved as soon as possible, end the bloodshed. I think that's actually in the self-interest of everybody involved. I think it's in the self-interest of Ukraine, I think it's in Russia's self-interest, and I think it's in the self-interest of the West either. Now, that doesn't mean that Putin just gets to have whatever he wants. I think we have to have a reasonable deal that achieves certain important objectives. I think one of the great threats from the West's perspective, and I think even from an Indian perspective, is the rise of the Russia-China alliance. I think that in ironic ways, this war has actually pushed Russia further into China's hands.
Let me ask you, have you met with Indian Prime Minister Modi? You've spoken about him a few times. You observe him, and how would you, in Vivek Ramaswamy style, describe him?
Yeah, so I would love to meet him. I haven't met him yet. I've met with a number of other world leaders and prime ministers who have reached out to me during their visits to the United States. But I think the Indian ambassador has been in touch with our team, and I'm sure we'll meet at some point. So I'd welcome that opportunity. And should we visit India at some time in the next couple of years, I'm sure we'll have an occasion to do that. The way I describe him is he's somebody who doesn't apologize for what it means to be an Indian. He's the leader of India. He's a citizen of India, and he doesn't apologize for his pride in his country. And because of that, he gives pride to the other people who he leads. And I think that's an admirable quality.
Thank you very much, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Thank you, and I'm confident at some point in the next couple of years, we'll make a visit to India, and then I hope it's productive.
Well, we look forward to that.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.